All right. So as we begin, I want to start by expressing solidarity with the people in Ukraine and with others around the world who are affected by war and violence. We know that feminists are consistently on the front lines of crisis response, whether it's the climate crisis, whether it's a global health pandemic, or military aggression. And we know that the Generation Equality Forum process aims to boost momentum around gender equality. And that momentum is certainly more urgent now than ever. So we hope this conversation around funding feminist transformations can contribute with some insights on making those commitments to support feminist movements a reality. To begin, I would like to hand the floor to Louise Holt. Louise has spent over 20 years with the Government of Canada. She's currently the Director General, Social Development, Global Issues, and Development Branch of Global Affairs Canada. And please note, I'm only making very small intros for our speakers, and we'll include fuller bios for them in the chat box so you can learn a bit more about them. But thank you all again for joining us today. And Louise, please come on video, and we look forward to hearing.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon from where I am, everyone. Good day, everyone. Just a quick check that you can hear me before I jump in. 2 thumbs up. Thanks, Cindy. Great. Yeah, I am delighted to be here and to participate in this event of the Global Alliance for Sustainable Feminist Movements. As Cindy mentioned, I don't think today's discussion could be more relevant, both to the work of the Commission on Status of Women and in the context of the conflicts that are unfolding around the world today, including in the Ukraine. Let me just start by a little intro to the Global Alliance for those of you who don't know it. The Global Alliance is a multi-stakeholder initiative that was launched at the First Generation Equality Forum in Mexico, and was announced as a collective commitment of the Action Coalition on Feminist Movements and Leadership at the Second Generation Equality Forum in Paris. It was launched with the express aim of increasing, sustaining, and improving financial and political support for women's rights and feminist organizations and movements around the globe. And wonderfully, since the Mexico Forum, over 100 partners have joined the reference group of the Alliance, including governments, philanthropic organizations, women's funds, international organizations, and women's rights organizations and networks. Our goal is to work through the reference group to co-create a new dedicated space, the Alliance, for sustained dialogue and learning for both funders and recipients, and for all partners committed to fund and support women's rights organizations and feminist movements in a way that acknowledges their capacity and sustainably supports their central role and core mandate to advance gender equality work at local, regional, and global levels. And so today is one step along our journey. We're here to learn more about the experiences of funders and grant recipients working together. What has worked, and what are some of the challenges they face in partnering? I'm really excited to have with us today representatives of 3 really dynamic feminist organizations actively, and I dare say boldly, working to advance and defend the rights of women, girls, and LGBTQI collectives in their communities, as well as 3 funders supporting this important work. First, we have 1,000 Currents, which mobilizes resources and relationships in support of grassroots groups and social movements around the world to build equitable futures. And they will have a conversation with Diva, Diverse Voices for Action for Equality, an organization that comes out of Southern feminist and lesbian activism and links into wider women's, youth, human rights, ecological, climate justice, trade justice, sustainable development, and peace-building alliances and coalitions in Fiji and the region. Next, we will have the Swedish International Development Agency, who has invited the Urgent Action Fund to share their real-time experience as an organization committed to supporting women, trans, and non-binary activists on the ground in the Ukraine and surrounding areas by providing much-needed flexible funding and security support. And finally, we will have the Hewlett Foundation and the Global Fund for Women, who will share their experience supporting feminist-led abortion rights movements in Francophone West Africa, and also fostering cross-regional learning between movements in West and East Africa. So to all of you, thank you for agreeing to share candidly your experiences with us today. I think we're in for a real treat. And before handing back to Cindy, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the dedicated work of all members in the process of co-creation, and particularly recognize the role of AWID as the host for the Secretariat of the Alliance, generously supported by the Ford Foundation. On behalf of Canada, we are very proud to be part of the co-creation process of the Alliance. We hope that this event will be a real opportunity to learn from each other and to renew our efforts as a group to continue our work to support feminist movements and organizations who, as Cindy noted, are on the front lines of responses to crises around the globe, whether those be related to climate, global health pandemics, or conflict. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Louise. And now we come to our dialogues, which I think are kind of at essence part of the entire motivation for this design process for the Global Alliance for Sustainable Feminist Movements, how we enrich each other in our different experiences to better support feminist organizing. We wanted this format to really delve into some of the nuts and bolts, to share the powerful work that feminist groups are driving and some of the most effective ways that they're being supported. We know that sometimes good intentions on behalf of different funders are there, but there might be challenges to deliver on those intentions. So we hope the conversation can both motivate others who are interested in expanding their support for feminist movements, as well as provide some useful tips for how different funders are putting this support into practice. So we'll hear how it looks different for different kinds of funders and how the toolbox shifts. But it's definitely possible. I think that's a key message to take away. The combination of political commitment and technical know-how, that's really critical for effective support for feminist movements. So we're going to start with an initial round to hear from all of our panelists in 3 different dialogues, and then we'll circle back for our speakers to react to each other and exchange some questions and comments. And please do feel free to share any questions that you have in the Q&A box. So let me invite Noeline Nabulivu and Luam Kidane to join us on the screen. Noeline is currently the Executive Director of Diva for Equality, holds many social movement roles, and Luam is the Director of Global Programs at Thousand Current. And to you both. Can you please share a bit about your experience, the work that you do, and what the relationship between Diva for Equality and Thousand Currents looks like? As I understand it, it's beyond a funder-grantee dynamic towards a shared feminist political project. What is it that makes that possible?
Thank you, Cindy. So now with you, question for you, why has it been impactful for Diva for Equality to receive longer term and core support from Thousand Currents?
Thanks. We go back a while now, Thousand Currents and Diva for Equality, at important points in our organizational, since we started in 2011 as a really small collective, of lesbian, bisexual, trans masculine generally, and women from grassroots communities who really started from a need. Basically, it came out of a set of targeting women, LBT women in Fiji on the sports field, actually. And then a growing collective started to move together, and out of that work, in the best stories, I think, we then had to work out is it that we do and how do we fund it. And only a couple of us had come from movement backgrounds. The rest were coming new into the work. And so that story of our growth and how then we resource it, starting from literally from a feminist a professor friend of mine, who'd been one of my teachers, feminist teachers, who gave us literally our transport funds of $10 a month. And I'm saying this because often we don't talk about the fact that, you know, groups start in many, many different ways. Some can start with a lot of funders, started from very, very small voluntary work and trying to work out how, in the middle of many of us being in poverty and not being sure how we were going to get through and build the body of resources. So as we grow, you know, ever more important to have both the flexible core funding that we require as our organization kind of shifts and moves, but also to have those moments when you're focused on specific projects. So we were clear from start with those we know, and those we know were ones like IWHC, were ones like Mama Cash and Astrea Lesbian Foundation. And I'm saying those because it takes an ecosystem of partners really to make sure. And then later on, Thousand Currents came into the mix as well. We'd said no to quite a few large sets of funding because we just didn't feel like we were ready at the time. So one of the things that I would say about why it's important to have something like Thousand Currents as a strong partner is we expert in Diva for Equality. We design the work in constituency, in community. And so the base building needs time, you know, it needs time to grow both inside the organization and then how do you build that out? How do you build those concentric circles that are about a feminist movement building over years? So we've got a praxis-based approach, which is action and reflection cycles. But if you're good practice in every part of your organizing, programs, projects, funding, then you need to have funding that can be with that can respond and not be afraid of the fact that you don't, that's going to remain the same from January to December, that you're going to have things that crop up. And that's the genuine relationship that we've built with Thousand Currents and others. We need to be able to, constituency is indicating, and that's happened all the way through those 10 years. Thousand Currents asks a lot of questions when you first join the partnership, but what I love about it is the tone of the questions really is a conversation. It's not hectoring, it's very calm. From the first approach that happens, you're clear you're in a relationship because of value of each other's work. And you learn a lot about each other's organizing style. The communications I found really nurture, they're very flexible and clear. The paperwork is done incredibly quickly. And you're aware from the beginning that this relationship is different. They talk about long-term relationships after the first year is complete. And when the time comes, the announcement of the partnership is done quietly, but it's in a really principled way. And you feel like you've given a lot of the information that you require. It becomes part of your partnership agreement. And then every year you're just sent a very short email that says, please update this. How is this, you know, for us? And you feel like they're standing beside you on your growth journey. And the announcement that the final report, apart from financials, which you get to present in your own format, there's literally a one question that you're asked for the entire year's work. And for radical feminists, I think there is a politic about that is really, really valuable, that can be underestimated in what it is like to be able to do that, to be, when you're used to all these models and platforms and you know, we all know that the fact that Thousand Currents is so straightforward is slightly strange in the beginning. So I had a funny moment when we gave, the last point I'll make is I had a funny moment when we gave Currents our global budget for the next 3 years coming up, specific amount after 2021, you know, not being presumptive. And I got like this very assertive email from the other end from Thousand Currents saying, you know, you can put in the next 2 years in a permanent, you know, partnership, and so put it in your global budget. And I think that that's an extraordinary relationship to be able to build. That takes a lot of work on the back end, at their end and at ours. And really, we actually had a little teary moment in the Management Collective around that, because that's what I think feminist funding is truly about, is that the burden of the work that we're already doing every day is not heavier, that relationships are respectful, that we problem solve when we have to, but it's clear that movement priorities and the struggle for justice is the focus that we both have. And we trust each other to keep building a resource base, a feminist resource base for the work. So I'll end with that. Thanks. So maybe I think I'm next to ask you. So maybe do talk about, Thousand Currents and why and how you prioritize funding local autonomous movements, because I think it's really important to talk about the politics behind the funding with Thousand Currents. Tell us a bit more about what you do to support groups and movements in all regions.
Thank you, Nolene. So we fund a diversity of movements, including non-registered formations with core funding, because we know that transformative systems change is driven by movements, people building power from below and not by top-down policy initiatives. We fund movements with core funding because funding movements is not just, it's also effective. We fund movements with core funding because people who are on the front lines are best placed to be setting the agenda for what needs to happen. We fund movements with core funding because they are the ones that have developed the proven, complex, and also interrelated solutions that we so desperately need in order to solve the multiple crises we're in, the political, economic, social, and cultural, and environmental crises that we're in. In addition to funding, we also understand that another responsibility that we have is to help create a more enabling environment for movement and movement support organizations to be able to do their systems change work. So as part of that responsibility, we work with our philanthropic peers through our advocacy initiatives and our donor education and donor organizing programs. This includes programs like the Thousand Currents Academy, for example. The Academy is a training program for people working in philanthropy who are interested in learning about and cultivating philanthropic practices which are in service of movement. The Academy also includes on our thematic areas, which are climate justice, food sovereignty, and economic justice. Another key way that we support movements is also to ensure that we nurture an internal organizational culture that prioritizes learning. This includes what we could be doing to better support movements, to how we are learning about the work of our partners. Given that we know that movement building is not linear, we recognize the need for flexible and adaptable learning tools so that we don't value numeric and short-term outcomes, incremental siloed solutions over holistic process-based solutions from the grassroots. So in conclusion, what I'm saying is fund movements, trust movements, and you won't always get it right, so you have to learn them from movements. So turning back to you, Nolene, as a feminist civil society organization working on multiple sets of justice concerns, what kind of relationships does Diva for Equality hope for with a funder?
Thanks, Luam. Really, like I've said, the importance of trust-based and respectful, equitable relationships, and to me, it's like how you show that in practice by all parties. It's important to know each other's sets of work over time, and I think we're still doing that as well. One of the challenges of that is when people come and go within organizations, and I think there is a responsibility to build, the level of knowledge within the organization. On every, we do, there are always 3 or 4 of us from the Diva side on the call. It's very important that we have that kind of historical her story, of the relationship. It's important to really talk about and match politics. A lot of those conversations that we have are about politics and about others in relationship also with Thousand Currents, and we're encouraged to kind of talk through some of those issues about are we working with them and how's that going. So that's useful. I think that, it's really important to keep using the language of feminist relationship, you know, about balance in the relationship, about the politics of well-being and care and social provisioning. I would love to have more of a conversation about, you know, with feminist funders, but also to talk about what happens when the individual changes or your own organization changes, your feminist organization. What happens when it's going through some drama or trauma, or, you know, there's all kinds of things that happen when humans work together. The necessary growth, the stretching that happens, but not to do it from a place of negativity. Because for those of us who, you know, live and work and are trying to come to grips with very old and oppressions every day, wading through the patriarchal mud as we work, don't really have a lot of energy for kind of petty politics and white noise. So it's like increasing the positive energy flow, but being really assertive and clear on who is constituency, who ought to, how is it this work is necessary over the long term? Because we really think through and work through the elimination of jumping through hoops. You know, we will walk away if it gets toxic. We've done it several times. And I think it's important to talk about those times when it becomes toxic and you're not able to troubleshoot quickly. And what are those processes that you require in order to, you know, to keep it in a usefulness of that relationship. Abuse is abuse and discrimination is discrimination. And it also happens, I think that's telling me to wind up. We value the relationship with all feminist and progressive left funders because it's the solid foundation to any work we do. And I'll just say the last thing is there are always times in autonomous movements when you need a kind of funding that maybe isn't even dreamt of yet. Like we need emergency centers now. We need to think about ecological centers for the future, for food and food security and other sets of work. So we want to have those conversations, and it's with groups like Thousand Currents and Mama Cash and many others that we can have those discussions. Thank you very much. Sorry, I went on a bit.
No, thank you so much, Noeline. So we'll look forward to bringing you and Luam back. I would like to invite Shalini, Lena, and Lisa to join us. Shalini is the Deputy Executive Director at Urgent Action Fund for Women's Rights. Lena Abu Habib is the director of the Asbari Institute for Civil Society and Citizenship at the American University of Beirut, and she's also the MENA advisor for the Urgent Action Fund. And Lisa Mossberg is here representing SIDA. She's the strategy coordinator for Sweden's global strategy for gender equality and women's and girls' rights. So thank you all for being with us. Lisa, I can only imagine that SIDA faces some different constraints from an institution like Thousand Currents when it comes to supporting feminist movements and organizations. And so I think we're all excited to hear some of the ways of working that you all have found useful to effectively support feminist organizing. So Shalini, let me hand over to you. I think you're going to kick us off.
Thank you so much, Cindy, and lovely to be here with all of you for this very important conversation that we're excited to be a part of. Urgent Action Fund, as many of you know, is a feminist fund, and we provide rapid response grants to feminist activists and movements globally. We're part of a consortium of 3 other Urgent Action Funds that are regionally based. So Urgent Action Fund Latin America and the Caribbean, and Urgent Action Fund Asia and the Pacific. And the Urgent Action Fund that I represent is physically located. Our staff is mostly in the US. And we fund a number of regions, including the Middle East, Central Asia, Eastern Europe, the US, Canada, and the Caucasus. And we started our partnership with SIDA in 2019. And we went into the partnership as a representative for all 4 of the sister funds. So this is a global partnership. And shortly after we were in that partnership, COVID hit. Of adjustment, I want to start off by saying, which the previous speakers mentioned, Noeline and Luam's importance of political commitment. And I think we started with a shared political commitment where SIDA and Urgent Action Fund really understood and live the values of knowing that strong autonomous feminist movements are the key to gender equity. And so I think that was the foundation for what has become a really strong relationship. I think that what I do want to say is that it doesn't mean that it was always great and wonderful. There were definitely challenges along the way, but what we realized is that part of it was the conversation and building the relationship around trust. So for example, there were very different ways that CETA worked that UAF just didn't work that way. For example, things around reporting and requirements around that. And it was a conversation, multiple conversations, that was able to get us to a middle ground where we had our needs met and CETA had their needs met. So I think that was really an important part of what has allowed us to be in such a successful relationship with CETA. I think the other thing that has allowed us to be in that relationship successfully is just understanding the concept of risk and being able to be open to have the conversation around reframing of risk and what does that actually mean for an organization like CETA, an organization like Urgent Action Fund, because there was, both of us were learning things along the way. We found common ground to have conversations with each other that'll see the other institution, be honest and open with each other. And I think that really allowed us to be truthful and honest and transparent in the partnership. So I'm going to pause, and actually I want to invite Lena in to talk a little bit about our advisor and our program. She is an advisor from MENA, and that was actually one of the things that was new of advisors on the ground who were informing our grant making and the idea of participatory grant making. And before I do that, I just want to really thank Lena for being here. She is calling very late at night, and there's no electricity where she's at in Beirut. So thank you, Lena, and I will pass it to you.
Thanks, Charlene. It's a pleasure to be here, because I'm always afraid that internet will give up.
Es un placer estar aquí.
I want to bring what you're saying in just a few minutes to the context.
Quiero contar lo que estás diciendo del contexto de la región Oriente Medio y Norte de África y contar lo que es ser consejera de la Fondo Global en este contexto.
And I want to begin by saying that we've had our first meeting of advisors, which was convened by UAF not so long ago. And it was fascinating for us as advisors. I mean, some of us knew each other and some of us
Algunas nos conocíamos y otras no.
To talk about how we can
y queríamos pensar cómo podemos contribuir en el proceso, cómo podemos
make sure that funding goes to the especially to the emerging intersectional feminist groups in the region. And why is it important? It's because essentially of the risks in this region. Perhaps similar to other regions, but let me take just a couple of minutes to talk about this. You know, for the MENA region, for instance, there is no shortage of funding. There's actually quite a lot of funding, which targets our regimes, which, you know, as we speak, international organizations, multilateral organizations fund directly murderous regimes in the region, probably in the neighborhood. And you know, I really don't need to talk about how problematic this is, especially for the young groups that Urgent Action Funds tries to reach and tries to support. The fact that there is, you know, this situation of conflict, heavily polarized societies, and actually the outright hostility vis-a-vis active feminists, vis-a-vis intersectional feminists, vis-a-vis queer folk, vis-a-vis refugees, etc. All the more actually to think about models of funding which are represented by UAF. So what is it that we try to do in a context where registration of groups is problematic? Banks are monitored, monetary transactions are controlled. The first thing, you know, to circumvent all these risks is actually simply facilitate access to. So one of the things that we do as advisors is actually identify and do, all of us are volunteer advisors, all of us are feminist advisors. We do this as our contribution to the movement, to the feminist movement in the region. So basically the identification of these voices, who are these people, what do they do, what do they need? So there's a lot of groundwork that is done, and what I like particularly is being able to come to Urgent Action Fund and to say, there's this new group. This is what they're doing. They're doing this amazing work on period poverty, or there's this amazing, wonderful group, queer group in Lebanon, that just wants to open a safe space for the queer community who has been displaced after the big Beirut blast. And this is what it takes. Then the process is one that is not intimidating, that understands that we are working in such a volatile, such a dangerous context, that the process actually takes this into consideration. And I think I'd like to think, I don't know what Shalini feels about this, but I'd like to think that we do play a role in building that trust that allow this seamless process to happen very quickly, that allows, a better understanding of what is going on, and that saves a lot in terms of resourcing a big machinery that does this, that, its raison d'etre is actually to do this monitoring. And I think one of the things that we've been able to do with Urgent Action Fund is to leverage the support of Urgent Action Fund and make this group actually in a better position to get more support and more funding from another source. So in a way, to speak to what Nolene was saying, build that ecosystem slowly, and support, support support that trust in local feminist movements, which wouldn't have been possible otherwise. And there's actually what I like is that our colleagues, our friends in the feminist movement, the new emerging groups, there's no intimidation. Nobody needs to figure out and translate loads and loads and loads of forms and formats and whatever. There's actually an understanding that, number one, this is a very volatile context. Number two, want to do, and number three, that resource that's the limited resource that is provided, a building block towards bringing more resources. And I think with this, I want to end here. Thank you so much, and I'm giving the floor to Lisa Mosberg from SIDA, what we call here the back donor, actually.
Thank you so much, Lina, and Shalini as well. I'm so happy to be here together with you and to talk about our partnership. And I think what you just explained, Lina, is a very, very good example of something that we have from SIDA's side have learned in the framework of our partnership, how you're giving an excellent example of how your knowledge and networking is an accountability or quality assurance system in itself. And you're talking about the accountability to the movement, which is something we fully recognize. I will try to be short, but explain a little bit where we come from in what we're trying to do in this partnership from SIDA's side. Our funding is, of course, a part of the Swedish feminist foreign policy. And we see clearly that a feminist development cooperation must be based on recognition of existing power inequalities and the efforts to adjust this. And also the key recognition of feminist organizations and movements as the key change makers. We must go beyond our work for gender equality. It's still extremely important. Gender mainstreaming and having a gender perspective is still key of everything we do in Swedish Development Cooperation. But walking the walk of a feminist development cooperation, we need to put funds in the hands of feminist movements. And I think the how to do it, I think Luana earlier on explained extremely well all the good reasons for long-term core support, so I won't stay with that. A precondition being a state authority, as SIDA, is that we are working with Swedish taxpayers' money, and we are responsible to the Swedish Parliament. We are followed up by the Swedish National Audit Office and also by Swedish and international media. And that's a good thing, of course, because that is the reason that we keep on getting 1% of the Swedish GDP for development cooperation. So we need to respond to that, but we also need to challenge our structures and procedures. And we have learned a lot over the years on how to do that. Entering into a partnership like the one with the Urgent Action Fund, we see it as like a conversation of getting to know a new partner and putting on the table, this is what we would like, and this is what we can give and what we expect. What do you like and expect? And can our expectations meet? And from our side, it is about these follow-up things. We need to make sure agreement conditions are forwarded to when money is forwarded, and we need to see specific quality assurance systems. But we also recognize that there's so much we have learned, and the advisors system is for one example, excellent example of triangulation of information. We have also, of course, pushed our restraints a lot, recognizing that if we want to support women, trans and non-binary human rights defenders, it's not reasonable to ask for a receipt after someone has been evacuated. If possible, it's good to have the receipt. That's the Swedish audit will be happy. But we need to have the trust and confidence that this money is well spent. And we do. Being in a close partnership, we do, and we have found our ways to regulate that. I think also very important to mention is that from our side, it's very much more than the transaction of money and our contribution to very much us becoming more and more knowledgeable and getting your support, Shalini and Lina, in understanding situations for human rights defenders and the preconditions for women's movements and the conditions for long-term movement building, that we can improve our policies and everyday. I think I should back, and I would give the word back maybe by asking Shane, very well aware you had to challenge your limitation in for working with SIDA. You didn't work with a bilateral donors before, and maybe you see different roles for different kinds of donors.
So I'm going to look to our cruise director, Cindy, because I feel like we might be out of time.
We're a little out of time.
Okay, so maybe at the larger conversation, I can read a great question. Thank you.
You know, someone from the audience had also put in the Q&A a question, and I think you've started to unpack that, Lisa, around that Shalini mentioned that makes it. Knowing that we're so short on time, an hour is far too short. We're moving now to our next dialogue group, which we actually have recording, a conversation between Erin Williams from the Global Fund for Women and Althea Anderson at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. And we are thrilled to have Erin, who will join us live at the close. So Camilla, I will hand over to you to run that video.
Hi, Althea. How are you doing?
Hi, Erin. So great to join you today. How you doing?
It is. You have your tea?
I do.
Real talk with Althea and Erin.
Love it.
Well, maybe we should just let our audience know how we know each other as colleagues.
Yeah. So when I started with Hewlett 4 years ago, I was responsible for the partnership with IWHC. And that is when we started to work together on the organization's DEI work. And in those early days, I learned so much from you about trust-based philanthropy, about the limitations of how the field was thinking about the integration of DEI institutionally. And in many ways, it really prepared for the opportunities and challenges that we've encountered over the last 2 years.
Yeah, and what I remember so fondly is you were in the office, and at one point in the meeting, you had mentioned something about a program officer's salon, and I was like, what is this? How do I find out more information about this? And what I really appreciated about it was the fact that this was a space for program officers to share without directors or management there. And really a brave space for learning, and especially learning in public, which I think is a really critical component to all of the work that we do, and particularly in philanthropy, because there's a lot of learning in public that we need to do, and we have to be comfortable with that, and get comfortable with those discomforts. So I remember that, and you shared it, and then we were able to implement it at IWHC. So that was just something that I really, really appreciated about our relationship and partnership early on. And it's funny because, speaking of learning, I was just in a conversation with Roz Lee, who's now at the Equality Fund, and she was saying, I want to reinvent this notion of monitoring and evaluation. And what we really need to do is be learning and unearthing what feminist movements and gender justice movements need in order to succeed. And one of the things that I remember early on in our partnership was that you had provided a space and paid for the space. Hewlett paid for the space for grantee partners to strategize, to talk amongst ourselves about what was working with the partnership with Hewlett, what could be strengthened with our relationship with Hewlett. And I just felt that was a really wonderful way to support our connection as grantee partners, but also holding you accountable. I mean, you were like, what do we need to do differently, and how can we, and how can you all hold us accountable? And had we not had that conversation together, I don't think we would have come up with some of the strategies and suggestions that we had. So I thought that was something that was unique.
Yeah. And the learning is mutual, right? So throughout our work, together on that local advocacy strategy, I learned in public what it would look like for Hewlett to be a more responsible, responsive, and accountable partner. And yes, there are lots of challenges of all of this unlearning we're doing, the undoing, but what I've also really learned that it's absolutely possible. And our global reproductive equity strategy refresh, I think, is a real good example of what that looks like in practice. So one, we kind of invited those closest to the issues to be a part of the decision-making table. We really wanted to co-create the strategy with partners, and to really ensure that those who are rarely acknowledged, rarely funded, feminist movements, were really at the table with us, and that they could really change our thinking about, what do we think about as change? beyond health outcomes. How do we assess progress, as you were talking about, rethinking M&E? And how do we strengthen ecosystems, some of our more recent work? And inviting you to the advisory committee was like so important because you are really such a critical voice in the field. And you really pushed our thinking at every single turn. You were like, okay, let's talk about the who and the how of funding. The language that we use that acknowledges that women and girls, we are not our fertility choices. We are multidimensional people with whole lives and not just the outcomes of development. And our work together has led to this, next chapter in strengthening feminist movements in Francophone West Africa around abortion rights. And what I feel is that, we keep making more of that iceberg visible and really going deeper in our work together and in our learning.
Yeah, and it's interesting because being an agitator in those spaces, right, it's complex, of course. And you can feel supported and held in that, or you can feel like you're on the outside and that you're not supposed to be in that space. And as an agitator in the space, when, I kept going on about LGBTQI folks and sex workers and how important they are to sexual and reproductive justice movements and abortion rights, I felt like there was a trust that was there, that I was being held in that moment when I was agitating. And I think that was so important, especially as we grapple with this sense of urgency on so many fronts, right? I mean, we talk about urgency as, a white supremacist notion, right? That we have to be right there, right now, respond right away. You have to make quick decisions. There's no time for reflection yet. And we do have to move. And there is an urgency for philanthropy to do different, because we know that it's white and it's male dominated. Very little, 1.6% of funding gets to women and girls in all of their diversities directly. And, we're just have to do better. We really have to do better as philanthropy, and we have to act now. And it harkens back to a webinar, Black feminists, organizing around the Black Feminist Fund and saying, it's our money, it's our ancestral resources. And so how do we, grapple with the fact that philanthropy has a history in the structures and systems we're trying to change? And at the same time, how are we as individuals making those steps internally in our own institutions to change and shift the way we're thinking, so that then we can, as a collective, funders, advocates, feminist movements, etc., change those same structures. It's very complex.
But, the unlearning, the rethinking, and then there are brave and practical ways that philanthropy can integrate feminist funding principles and to get us out of our comfort zones. So I've outlined some of these in the practices, some of these practices and the lessons learned from the evaluation we did of the local advocacy strategy. But I want to share a few right now of the actual practical ways, in this moment that we can change. One, naming power shifting as an outcome of grant making and a form of mutual accountability, actually naming it. Shining a light on those power hoarding practices and working to dismantle them. Inviting those closest to the issues into proposal development, into the reporting conversations with attention to language equity. And really, as we've talked about so many times, prioritizing flexible, long-term core support. Very clear things that philanthropy can do. And again, integrating equity into the grant making and partnerships is hard, but it is not at all impossible. And over time, I feel like addressing these inequities and shining a light on them, we've seen changes. We've seen over the last few years more and better funding, greater access to decision making, but I think also more transparent and honest discussions about what you were talking about, these root causes, the need to address racist, sexist, homophobic, neo-colonial thinking that underlines inequitable philanthropic practices. And that's where we need to go.
Yeah, no, I agree. And what I'm really excited about is our new movement-led approach to grant making that you're helping to support. And I mean, really what it is, it's a process of deep listening to movement needs and then responding accordingly, including, as you said, the shifting of decision-making power over where resources are going and where holistic support is needed and necessary from a peer-to-peer approach. And, you know, that is, I think, incredibly important for philanthropy to understand, and that the deep listening is critical and crucial and part of feminist and trust-based philanthropy. And then at the same time, how are we linking and bringing together not only our external work, but also what we do internally in our own institutions. And I think that's an incredible opportunity for us, as you said, to address anti-Blackness in our own institutions, address anti-transness in our own institutions. And we're currently going through, as some may know, but a feminist restructuring process at Global Fund for Women to be able to meet the movement needs. And so we're having to ask ourselves some hard questions about how are we structured, who's at the table, what does that look like? We've got some initiatives that we've started internally, like a Black liberation team, and thinking about all of these questions and what it means for us as a feminist fund, and looking to others in doing radical restructures to really meet the need of movement now in this critical time.
I love this new direction for Global Fund for Women. I think it's really raising the bar by using an intersectional feminist approach. And it's really important, you know, the way that you've described this restructuring, that we keep pushing each other and the field and reimagining what is possible and developing new practices aligned with that vision. And within funding institutions, I totally agree. You know, programmatic and equity champions are necessary, but like very insufficient. We need to evolve and institutionalize grant making with an equity lens. And that means policy, programmatic changes that need to happen, not just in program teams, but in grants management, and legal, and communication teams. The type of restructuring that you're talking about, that you're undertaking at Global Fund for Women, and Hewlett is embarking upon this journey as well. And it's really interrogating like how white supremacy, patriarchy, and paternalism show up in our policies and practices. So externally, I think it's about resourcing partners in ways that do not require them to continue to contort to be seen as acceptable to funders.
Definitely.
Funders need to learn, to bend, to stretch, to evolve our thinking and practices to meet those closest to the issues where they are, in the spirit of partnership, instead of paternalistic like altruism. And so this is not about change at the margins. This is really about structural change and about transformation.
Yes, definitely. And we need to have more of these truth-telling conversations where we can share, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And, you know, as we said at the onset, be prepared to be uncomfortable, but know that there are people that can hold you in that, support you in that, and reach out to those people, especially as you're thinking about how you can change your grant making practices to meet movement needs. So, you know, we're on the right track.
Yeah, the only thing I would just add to that, because I totally agree, I think that's a great place to end, is that philanthropy really just needs to bend. Yeah.
Agreed.
Sit there.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Althea.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Until next time.
Until next time. Thank you.
I would love to invite all of our panelists to come back on video for our closing few minutes. I want to share that I took an informal poll. I know we're only scratching the surface with this initial conversation. There's some great questions. I would love to see the Global Alliance for Sustainable Feminist Movements organize a follow-up session where we can dig in, because while there are many themes, the critical role of trust and approaching this as a relationship that we're building over time, learning about how we meet each other's needs, you know, and it's clear not all institutions will be able to make the same kinds of transformations. There's a lot of ripe areas for further discussion. So let me just pause. And so holding that thought that, you know, we're committed to make a follow-up, more in-depth conversation happen. We'll share some highlights from this with folks that have registered. Are there kind of immediate reactions that you would want to share? I'm going to suggest that we stretch our time to maybe just 10 minutes past the hour, if that's all right. And as you all heard each other, things that you would want to react to, questions that you want to pose for us to get to in the next round of conversation. Erin.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cindy and everyone. This was a really wonderful discussion, and I just learned so much. And it just really, I think, laid a really good foundation for how we can move forward together and having more direct conversations. And one thing that stood out for me from Nolene, she had mentioned having more conversations around social provisioning. And I just really wanted to hear a little more about that and get more curious about what that looks like. And I really, really appreciated the conversation about what happens when things are not going well and how we facilitate and mediate conversations in a feminist and grounded way. And I think that's something too that we could touch on in further conversations.
Thanks, Erin. Nolene, would you like to say a couple closing words on?
Sure. Just very quickly, I'd say, I mean, I think that would be like a wonderful place to start for another full conversation, is social provisioning. Just this, you know, there's a whole set of work, not just because of COVID-19, but I think, you know, it's helped this discussion to go further about, you know, who really is the basket of care and well-being and you know, and provisioning that allows all of our individual and collective societal relationships to form, to be nurtured, and that we keep talking about, you know, decentering from the politics of profit and moving to something else. So we need to be clearer as feminists also about that. Like, is it about care and well-being and social provisioning? Is this what we're putting forward as an agenda? So I'm really interested in that. And I just wanted one more thing, Cindy, is, you know, like asymmetric power is really what we talk a lot about in our work at Diva for Equality in the constituency. And one is, you know, we need those conversations of privilege and oppression strategies to do that with each other, so that it doesn't get fixed in north-south relationships. Yes, that, but as we've heard Erin and others talking about the intersectionality in practice, that is also about funding relationships. It's about resourcing and social provisioning. How you know, who's allowed to say what is in a relationship, whether one question or 10 matter in a funding relationship? Do we really have the opportunity? Is there real challenge for each other and a building of something different? So I think that sometimes, you know, as we say, those with the privilege are not open to the challenge of those who are having to their decisions all the time. And to be honest, that's about decolonization of every territory, including funding. So I just end with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nolene. Others, I know, final comments, reflections. Lisa, please.
Thank you to everyone for a really, really good conversation, and I very much agree. Let's make this a first one, and something that we continue different constellation to learn from each other and challenge each other, because that is so important. And I think that is one of the most important things we've all spoken about today, that it's about long-term relationships and relationships that change over time. potentially, and when we learn and when we shift and so on, and that is something good. I think it's also good to keep the perspective of us being in, or maybe through, at the end of a pandemic that told us a lot about flexibility and meeting needs in the realities of women and girls and non-binary persons in best possible ways, and how that calls for flexibility and presence. And final thing I'm really keen on exploring together with you in future for us is, of course, how we can make the best out of the combination of bilateral funding, such as the one from SIDA with philanthropic funding, how one can pave the way for the other, or what we can do to provide as much and combined funding to women's rights organizations and family. There are opportunities there. I hope so. But thank you, everyone.
Absolutely, Lisa. It goes back to that ecosystem that Noeline was talking about earlier. Shalini, please go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for this really great conversation. It's been lovely to be in dialogue with everyone and hear perspectives. I just wanted to make two last points. About the title of this session was about transformation, and I know that one of the things that we constantly hear as women's rights organizations and intermediaries is the concern around risk. And I would just say that, you know, without risk, there is no transformation. I think we know that as individuals. If we don't take a risk of doing something, we're not going to see the transformation. So I would just really encourage those funders and donors and organizations that are concerned about risk to reframe it. Because if we really want to create the society where people can live their lives freely and liberated, we have to take the risk to do that. And then the other thing I just wanted to address, what I think Lisa had asked me earlier, and I hope I remember the question, was just, you know, how UAF was impacted, what changed for us. And I think the one thing that changed for us in our partnership with SIDA was really, we learned a lot about systems that could help strengthen our grant making. And I'll say that with some trepidation, because sometimes we don't really like systems, but I do think that there were some things about the partnership and what was required. And again, we came to a middle ground of what they needed and what we could do, but it also helped us to strengthen the way we did some of our grant making and the way we did some of our reporting. And I think that's been helpful for Urgent Action Fund as an institution and as an institution that's growing. So just to reflect that back, that there was an opportunity for learning, but it was done with mutual respect and meeting in middle ground. Thank you so much for this conversation again.
Thanks, Shalini. Lina?
Yes, very quickly following what Shalini was saying. Yes, there are always risks, but by the way, just 2 points. Nothing compared to the risks that feminists are taking here in terms of what they're doing and taking into, I mean, really nothing. They're taking the, you know, it's a life risk. It's a risk of disappearing from the face of the earth. It's the risk of being hurt in so many different ways. And at the same time, that risk that we're taking is actually decreasing their risks, actually. Through this kind of support, through making them visible if they want to, through connecting them to other people. The risk that we're taking lessens the risks on feminist activists on the ground. That was an amazing conversation.
Right. Thank you, Lina. Luam has us for now, and then I am going to invite Monica Aleman. Please come join us. You have the lovely task of some remarks. We're thrilled to have you with us.
Muchas gracias, Cindy, y muchas gracias a todos. Inicio reconocer que este es un primer diálogo de los muchos diálogos que queremos hacer, ¿verdad? Este es un espacio que creemos que podemos construir juntos. Y cuando hablo del espacio, hablo de la Alianza Global Feminista en su proceso de
I'm speaking of the alliance, so I invite you to form part of the alliance. And if you want information, of course, we are completely available, both Cindy or any others who are here today. I think there are 4 messages that the panelists have given us today, and that for me would be very important. First, the need, the fundamental need to have a political agenda and a commitment in advancing
and committing to advance
an agenda based on rights. The
rights-based
second
agenda.
message is
Another thing that
something
Lina was
just said.
mentioning is that there needs to exist broader capacity to understand and program our work, centering it all in the defense of the rights and the lives of the human rights defenders. Another very important thing is the necessity of naming the necessity of equal sharing between parties. Another very important issue are principles that we have been discussing since the beginning of the Global Alliance, and we need to keep discussing in order to strengthen and broaden feminist movements. So once again, I thank you and I invite you to be part of this process. And we really thank everybody that's sitting in the creation of space, and also I thank you for the organizers for allowing this event to happen.
Really appreciated the thoughtful reflections and look forward to future conversations. Good night. Have a good day. We'll follow up with a report soon.